Hello, welcome to the Puff Pillow tutorial. I'm Jessica with Stay Cozy Creative Co, and I'll be guiding you through this project today. So first step is to gather your materials. I'm using a 14-inch round pillow insert, and I would say that that's the best size for what we're making today. But if you have a 12-inch one lying around, you're welcome to use that too. And then I'm using some of our chenille yarn. So I used just over 2 skeins of yarn, and you'll see that I end up swapping the colors. So for this first one I made with the mustard color in the middle and then cream on the outside. In the second one, I'm going to switch those colors so that I can use my scrap yarn. But you're welcome to use whatever colors and as many as you like. To get started, we're going to make a magic circle. So we're going to lay our yarn across our hand and then wrap it around and tuck a loop through the back side. Then we're going to make a slip knot through that loop. So basically just pull a loop through like you're tying your shoe, and then we're going to chain 2. And we're going to do that just by pulling a loop through the loop before it. You want your loops to be big enough for 2 fingers to fit through them. So our next stitch is going to be a double crochet. So you're going to put your fingers through that loop, wrap another loop around them, and then reach into the center of that circle, pull a 3rd loop through. So you should have 3 loops on your fingers, and then you're going to pull your working yarn through the first 2 loops and put that new loop on your hand, and then pull the working yarn through those 2 loops. So that's 1 double crochet. For this first round, we want to have 8 stitches all the way around. So our first chain counted as our first stitch. That double crochet we just made was our second stitch, and then this next double crochet that we're making is our 3rd stitch. So we want to have 8 total, which will end up being 1 chain plus 7 double crochet. Here I'm starting my 3rd double crochet, so fingers through the first loop, wrap a 2nd loop around, reach into the center of that magic circle, pull a 3rd loop through, and then pull the working yarn through those first 2 loops, and then working yarn through those last 2 loops. The great thing about a magic circle is that you can pull on that tail end of your yarn to tighten it up. So with the chenille yarn, you want to be kind of careful because it can snap if you pull it too tightly or too hard, but you just want to gently pull on it after each double crochet is kind of what I do, so that you cinch up the center and don't have a hole. So I'm just going to keep working on my double crochets here, and if you're new to hand crochet and you're still like, what is she doing? Feel free to stop this video at any time, rewatch it until you understand what's happening. If you've done hand crochet before and you kind of have the gist of it, then you're welcome to fast forward. So I should only have 1 double crochet left, so I'm going to pull on that tail end of the yarn to cinch up the center pretty tightly, and then I'm going to reach back into there to make my final double crochet. You do want to make sure that the center loop where you're pulling through the center is pretty tight so that you don't have a lot of excess yarn just hanging out. And here, if you aren't sure how many loops you have, you can go around and just find them, separate them pretty easily. Remember, you want to count that first chain as 1, and then keep counting each of your double crochets so that you have 8 stitches total. So you're going to grab your scissors and cut about 8 inches of yarn, and then you're going to pull that tail through the last loop that you made, and we're going to find the top of that chain that we made originally, and we're going to loop our tail yarn underneath the front side of that top loop all the way to the back, and then we're going to cinch up that circle, and then we're going to put the tail back through the loop that we came from, and then also that loop that's underneath, just to secure it. And this kind of gives a fake loop look on top of there, and so it makes it look pretty seamless. And then if you have enough yarn left, you can just do a simple knot here to tie it together, and that will secure it. Since we're making a pillow, this will be on the inside and you won't notice this at all. If you don't have enough yarn to tie it to, then you can just loop that tail underneath one of the loops and make a knot on the back side of your circle. And now it's time for row 2. So grab your second color if you're using a second color, and we're going to find the tail end of our yarn, and we're going to connect it to our first round. So you want to find the outside stitches of that first round and go in between two of your double crochets. So you're just going to put the working yarn of your new color underneath and then tie a knot to secure it. To start our second round, we're going to do a slip stitch just like we did at the beginning, and then we're going to do chain 3. So you're going to reach into that center, pull a loop through, and then pull a loop through that loop. So that is your slip stitch. And then now we're going to do chain 3 by pulling 3 different loops through the previous loop. So I view our second round as kind of 8 petals. And so for this first petal, we're going to have this chain that we made, and then we're going to do 2 triple crochet stitches. To do a triple crochet stitch, you're going to put your fingers through that first loop and wrap your yarn around your fingers twice so that you have 3 loops on your fingers. Then you're going to reach into that same space and pull yarn through so that you now have 4 loops on your fingers. Then you're going to pull your working yarn through those first 2 loops, and then through the second 2 loops, and then the final 3rd loops. So you're doing that 3 times for 1 stitch. So this is 1 triple crochet stitch. And we're going to make another one by wrapping the yarn around our fingers twice. Go into that space, pull your yarn through, so now you have 4 loops on your fingers, and then take your working yarn and you're going to pull it through those first 2 loops, and then the second 2 loops, and then the final 2 loops. And there we have completed our first petal. Now we're going to make 7 more petals. So they're going to be very similar. The only difference is that since we don't have a chain to begin, we're going to do 3 triple crochets into each of the spaces. So we're going to do our triple crochets the exact same way that we've been doing them. And as you can see, when I pull that loop through the space for the first time, you really want to make sure that it's snug up against the outside of that first row, because we don't want a lot of excess yarn just kind of bunching up or hanging out the back side. So you just want to pull that snug around as you're making your stitch. As you're making this second row, you want to make sure that your petals all are laying flat. If they start bunching up or curling towards the center, then you may be making your loops a little too tight. So you just want it to be kind of a nice in-between size where they aren't too tight where they're rolling, and you don't want them to be too big or loose where you have excess yarn kind of bunching up. So you can see I just counted my 3 stitches for my first petal and then my 3 stitches for my second petal. So now it's time to start my 3rd petal. I'm going to keep working and finish out this row. Again, if you need to stop at any time or rewatch something, please do that as often as you need to. That's the beauty of these video tutorials. And if you've got it and want to work ahead, then you can skip ahead to the part where I show you how to finish off this row. You might be noticing that I'm coming to the end of this skein of yarn. So once I finish up this stitch, I'm going to go grab another skein and show you how to connect it in case this happens to you. Basically, we're just going to knot the ends of our yarn pieces together. And so you want to make sure that your knot ends up on the back side of your round so that it's not sticking out the front. So here I was just making sure that that would happen. And I'm going to knot these around each other. And again, with the chenille yarn, you can pull snugly, but you do not want to pull hard and fast or it could snap. And since this is going to be on the inside of the round, you don't really need to worry about those tail ends. So once they're connected, then you just go back to your stitches and Sometimes I change the sizing of the loop just a little bit to make sure that it stays on the back side, but other than that, you're good to go. Okay, I've come to my final petal, so I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. This will be my last petal that I make. Once you've finished your final petal, we're going to finish off this row the same way we did the first row. So you're going to trim your yarn and pull the tail end all the way through. And then we're going to find that first chain that we made and then go to the top where it connects to the next stitch. And we're going to loop our yarn underneath the front part of it and pull it out the back side, and then put the tail of the yarn back into that loop that it came from while also going into that next loop behind it. Then flip your round over to the back side, and since this tail of yarn is a little bit longer, I'm going to loop it through one of the loops on the back side, and then I'm going to tie it to that first tail from the beginning. So you want to pull it snug but not too tight where you're changing the shape of your piece. But just knot it there, and then if you have too much tail, you can either tuck it in or you can trim off the end if you want. But it's also going to be on the inside of your pillow, so you shouldn't see it. Congratulations, you have finished your first round. And as you can see, I already have my second one completed, and I just need to tie in my loose ends. But to make your second one, you can just rewind this, watch it again to remind you how to make it again. You're going to do it the same way, and you can alternate colors like I did, or you can make both sides look the same or completely different. Really, whatever you want. And now it's time to connect our two rounds together. So I'm just laying them on top of each other, but you actually want to make sure that they are back to back because you want your finished sides facing out. So make sure you double check this because I have done projects before where I accidentally connected them wrong. And here I'm just laying this yarn color up next to my rounds because I was trying to decide if I wanted it to match one of the sides or if I wanted to do something different. And I've decided that I want to add a third color in, so I'm going to use the cashmere color to connect it so that there is an actual differentiation between those two sides. So here I'm just laying my pillow round in between both of them to make sure that it is indeed going to fit. And I decided that yes, with a slip stitch to connect it all the way around, that it should be fine. And I do want this pillow to be kind of puffy anyway, so it's okay if it's kind of snug. Here I'm double checking again that I do indeed have the back sides that are going to face each other, and so I'm going to lay those on there and grab my chenille yarn to get started. To begin the border, we want to pick up both of our rounds and we want to go in between two of the petals. So here I found that on one side and then now I'm finding it on the other side to make sure that both sides line up the same and that they're connected and look like mirror images on both sides. So here I'm finding that outside stitch on both of them because that's the one I want to connect them through on this first stitch, and I'm only going to go through that outer part of the stitch. So to begin, we're actually going to start on the inside of that round. We're going to take the working yarn, push a loop through one side of the round, and then we're going to find that loop on the other round and go under that strand of yarn as well. So this is our first connecting piece. You can see how it goes through both of those, and you want a few inches of tail yarn for the end. So then we're going to do a slip stitch through the next loop. So I'm going through only that outer strand of both of the loops on both rounds, and then I'm going to pull a new loop through. So I have the loop on my fingers. I'm going to go through the loop on one of the rounds and then the other round and then pull a new loop through all of those. So this is basically like a slip stitch or a binding off stitch where we're just connecting both sides of the round, and you want your working yarn, the tail of that, to be coming out the side of the rounds that you're working towards, and this just helps with ease of creating so that you aren't pulling it from the other side. So I'm just going to keep showing you how I'm taking this loop, laying it down on the loop on that side and then the loop on the other side, and then pulling a new loop through all of them. I am being conscious to go through the cream side first and then the mustard side second. So you could alternate if you want. It's going to be covered up by this outside stitch anyway, so it shouldn't be a big deal, but just for consistency's sake and since these colors are very different, I wanted to make sure that I was consistent with doing the cream one first and then the mustard one second. For size of stitch, you also want to remain consistent so that you aren't pulling your round too tightly as you go around, but keeping it with two fingers that can go through it should be sufficient. You also don't want it to be too loose, as before I said, because you don't want extra yarn just kind of bunching around. So I'm going to continue in the same way until I'm about 3/4 of the way around this circle. I want to leave enough room so I can get my pillow form into the inside. Here my loops looked a little weird and I wasn't sure which one to go through. I think that that was the beginning and end of my round, and so I had that extra piece of yarn that had come through. So if this happens and you run into that, just make sure that you're still in the same loop on both sides of your rounds so that you're maintaining the look on both sides so that they are mirror images of each other. I'm going to pause here and open up this cover that we're making, and I'm going to take my pillow form and kind of just squish it in on itself so I can squeeze it into the inside, and you just want to make sure that it's in there all the way. So really shove it into the bottom of the cover so that it fits. This will also make it easier on yourself when you're trying to finish the remainder of the border. So here I'm trying to find the tail end of my yarn to make sure that I don't lose it on the inside of my pillow, and then I'm going to go back to finishing the border. We are almost done with this pillow, so I'm going to finish up these last few stitches. You want to get all the way around, make sure that you don't miss any, and you want it to be connected. So I'm going to do this final stitch here, which is kind of tricky to get your fingers in, so I'm actually going to take the tail of the yarn and push it up through that mustard color, and then up through the cream color, and then up through that cashmere border color. Once you're sure that you've made it all the way around, you're going to grab your scissors and cut the tail of your yarn. I would give yourself plenty of space, so maybe like 12 inches would be sufficient. And then we're going to pull the tail of that yarn up through the loop like we have on all the other rows. Mine was a bit tight and stuck, so I kind of had to pull on each side till I figured out which one was the tail end. And then we are going to take that long tail and we're going to loop it under that first loop and then back around and through the final loop. So this again will make kind of like a faux stitch so that it looks very seamless. And so I'm going to pull that through, and then I'm going to knot it to that first tail here. I'm going to double knot it and then trim off some of the yarn tail and then just push that into the center of my pillow to hide it. Once the tail of your yarn is hidden, we are done with our pillow. I am absolutely in love with how this turned out, and I hope that you are in love with the pillow that you've made. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, I ask that you share the link to my website with other creatives in your life. You can find other tutorials, yarn, and DIY kits on my website, as well as free videos and resources on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my small business. Until next time, stay cozy, creative, and kind.